At Dark I Become Loathsome is about a man who undergoes a lot of trauma and suffering in a short period of time. And the book sort of chronicles how he goes about coping with that trauma and that loss. He constructs a disturbing ritual of this fake death ritual that allows people to have this transformative sort of rebirth by being buried alive. And that's kind of where the book starts, and it kind of just goes from there, totally batshit insane after that, and goes off the rails. It's dark, it's unsettling, very disturbing, and I hope you love it.
I want to start similarly to how our conversation began when we talked about This Skin Was Once Mine,
Yes.
where one of the first things that I wanted to acknowledge was that you had dedicated that book to Paul Tremblay. And so this time around, I open up the book. I did a thing too. I opened up the book. I see who it was dedicated to, and I almost immediately like took a picture and put it on social media and was like, "Aw." But then I remember talking to you and how it took Paul a while to realize that you had put the dedication in there because, like, he hadn't gotten the book until kind of later on. And then so I paused myself and I was like, I don't want to ruin some kind of surprise or special moment by just blabbing about this on social media. So I didn't put it. I didn't put it in there. But yeah, like, you dedicate this book to Daniel Kraus, and so what was the inspiration for that? And before you answer, I just want to say I love that these dedications are going out to people who are obvious like influence, or people that from are contemporaries that you admire and everything. So I love this kind of trend. But what is it about Daniel that inspired this?
Yeah, absolutely. So Daniel and I met like a couple years ago, right after things have gotten worse, kind of like blew up. And he's been just a gem of a human being, just like Paul has been a gem to interact with and call like a colleague and a peer and a friend. Um, like explained in the last time we spoke, dedicating the book "The Skin Was Once Mine" to Paul felt like a no brainer. It felt like something that I really had to do, especially since like the stories collected in that collection felt like they were maybe not like paying direct homage to what Paul does, but definitely like playing with ideas and things that he also likes to kind of grapple with in his own fiction. And I'm just such an admirer of his work. So when asked to come up with a dedication for this book, "At Dark I Become Loathsome," I really thought about who has really been there for me in the past year, which when I was, completing the dedication process for this book, it was like 2023, like the end of 2023, when my publisher came to me and said, like, who do you want to dedicate this book to? And I've spoken about this with you, like, just off the podcast in
Yeah.
general. But like 2023 was kind of a difficult year for me professionally with the release of my first novel, Everything the Darkness Eats. I had a lot of like very complicated, complex feelings about that book in particular. And I still struggle with that book quite a bit. I should probably just leave it at that rather than go off on a whole tangent, because I could go off on a whole tangent about my
Sure.
complicated feelings about that book. But I remember at the end of 2023, Daniel Kraus, as he often does, uh, put up his top books of 2023, like the top books he read that year. And I was flabbergasted when I saw that Everything the Darkness Eats was one of the books that he picked as one of his top books of that year. And he said that he picked it because not because it was a perfect book, which I know it's not a perfect book, but he said that it swung for the fences, that
Yeah.
book, and it really tried to do a lot of big things in such a slim volume,
Yeah.
and he really respected that. And that told me that, okay, this is an author of immense caliber. Like, a real a solid person, not only like a skilled author and artist, but also
Hmm.
just someone who is very decent and knows the how complicated creating art can be, and how we don't get it right the first time usually, or the second time, or the third time. And for me, that moment was such a special moment. Like, I look back on seeing that list of his top books of 2023 and seeing my novel on that list, and I'm filled with just so much joy and so much appreciation for him, because he didn't have to do that, and he did it completely unprompted. He
Hmm.
did it, from his heart, because the book spoke to him in some way. And I thought, with dedicating this particular book to him, At Dark I Become Loathsome, it felt right to dedicate this book to him, because he had done so much for me behind the scenes and had been such a great friend, such a supportive person, and then to recommend my book in such a public way. It was just so, I can't, I'm like tongue tied trying to come up with the words
Right.
to really describe it, because it was so meaningful after spending so much of that year really struggling with that book and its reception with people. Um, so this book, A Dark I Become Loathsome, felt almost like I was trying to follow in his footsteps almost a little bit as well, with the very like high concept aspect of it, where it's like, oh, it's this man who like performs these like strange rituals, and
Hmm.
he's like luring people from like the dark web into like his net of depravity. And it didn't feel exactly like something he would write, but it felt like something, it just, to me, it made sense to dedicate this book to him.
Yeah.
And I am so honored, and I had the honor of seeing him at Merrimack Valley Book Festival in October of this past year, or 2024 rather. And I gave him a copy of the book, and I, showed him the dedication page. So I had that like really that one-on-one like intimate, moment with him that was really special. So I'm not sure when you saw the dedication and when you read it, but I appreciate you not blasting it so that I
Yeah.
could have that moment with him. But it was really special, and he was so grateful and so gracious about it. And um, I really owe, it's almost becoming like a trend in my books to thank another writer that has like held the ladder down for me in a
Hmm.
way.
Okay.
Like, my next book is coming out in September of this year. We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, which is the first novel of my Burnt Sparrow series, and I've dedicated that book to an author that has been incredibly generous and kind to me, and has done a lot for me behind the scenes, and really championed me, and been super supportive, and just like a lovely person in general to be around. And I'm not going to say who it is. Obviously, I'm
Sure.
going to let people find that out on their own. But it just it feels like a responsibility almost to thank some of these people, because I wouldn't have this kind of attention on me, and I wouldn't have these opportunities if it weren't for some of the graciousness that they possess. It's been a really amazing journey so far. And I was actually struck earlier today. This website, I did a podcast with them, Capes and Tights. They put out like a list of 7 books that you should read by Eric Larocca. And I was like, wow, I've written 7 books already. Like, that's insane. That's amazing. And it feels like I started like maybe just yesterday, but it's crazy to think I've been like working at this since like 2020, since like the
Yeah.
pandemic. So it feels like a meteoric kind of rise in such a short amount of time. But I want to take these precious moments when I'm dedicating books to really thank the folks who held the ladder down for me, and or left the light on, to use these like cliche expressions,
Yeah.
that really have done a lot to further my career and just make me feel really welcome.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a trend that obviously I noticed with this book because it's the second time I've seen it happen in your books. But it's like it just yeah, it's very heartening. Is that a real word?
Yeah,
Heartening?
yeah,
Okay. It's that to see that because and I've talked on episodes, especially with Clay McLeod Chapman, about how one of my favorite things in kind of the social aspect of being in the book community is seeing people celebrate other people, like authors celebrating other authors or elevating them, amplifying their voices. That to me is like if I see someone doing that, that's a person I want to support because that's crucial and it's so helpful for people. So yeah, seeing that you're kind of doing the same thing. You're like, I'm also contributing by telling someone these people are awesome. But I want to focus on Daniel for a minute because I didn't really know much about him pre Whalefall, but he seems to me like the picture that I'm getting of him is that he's this very modest, like giant in a way,
yeah,
because he's written dozens of novels. He's written in different genres for different ages. Um, and it doesn't seem like there's anything he can't do. So, like, first of all, that's just impressive in and of itself. But he seems like he's just infinitely accessible and caring and thoughtful. And then if you ever hear him talk about George Romero, you can see how much art means to him. Like
mhm,
he really thinks about the the meaning behind Romero's work and like like what he was going for, and he really cares about him as a person. So like I've seen that vulnerability from him about like an idol of his. So I haven't seen much from Daniel, but everything I've seen just kind of shows me that like yeah, he's very dedication worthy.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, his prose is incredible. His books are amazing, and he is all of those things that you just described. Like he is so generous with his time. He is a giant in this
Yeah.
landscape of fiction, of speculative fiction. He is just one of the sweetest, most giving people I can think of, and um, I always kind of judge people by how I feel after having a conversation with them,
Yeah.
and I always leave any interaction with Daniel feeling a lot better, and that to me is like the sign of a good
Yeah.
person. And I feel like that's a great barometer for kind of any sort of social interaction for anyone in any industry, any profession. You know, if you leave a conversation feeling more whole or feeling more satisfied, more, emotionally satisfied, whatever, that's a good person to keep around. If you leave that conversation and you feel defeated or down, disenfranchised, disillusioned, whatever, that's definitely someone maybe you want to avoid.
Right.
Um, so Daniel has always been just so generous with his time, like I said, and has been just so giving, so excited to talk about like fiction, film, especially film. He's like a big film nerd, like I am, and we kind of speak the same language with that. So that's really amazing. Like I said, like these little moments in these books where I have the opportunity to kind of shout someone out. I really do want to take that opportunity as much as possible and just say like, look over here. Here's someone that's really cool that maybe you're not even reading, like maybe this is someone that you should be reading.
Yeah.
So far I've shouted out Paul Tremblay and now Daniel Kraus, and I feel like those are two great people to kind of look toward as like not only amazing exceptional writers but also just like great role models in
Yeah.
general for like how we operate in the horror community. They seem to kind of go about it with a grace that maybe not everybody kind of possesses, but it's unique to them. So I just, if you haven't read Paul Tremblay or Daniel Kraus, which I highly doubt people haven't who listen to this
Right.
show, I feel like they've read Paul Tremblay and Daniel Kraus. But if you haven't, they're great authors to support and to continue supporting when they release new books.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And both have books coming out in 2025. So keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to Daniel's book, especially Angel Down.
Is that, I don't, I feel like I didn't pay enough attention, but is that the one? I know he was writing something that was more science fiction-y or maybe less. I don't know.
That one, Angel Down, from what I understand, is kind of like almost unclassifiable. Like
Okay.
it's set like during the First World War, and it's about, from what I recall of the plot summary, um, these soldiers that encounter an angel on the
Nice.
battlefield. So I'm really looking forward to that. I hope I'm not butchering the synopsis, but it sounds incredible, and the cover art looks amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. The cover does look great. Um, all right. But so to kind of bring the focus along to back to At Dark I Become Loathsome. First of all, I've learned from your book that I'd been spelling loathsome wrong for like my entire life up until having to write it down a bunch and being
Yeah,
corrected on it. So that's a little unintended thing you taught me.
amazing.
Um, but like, I'm going to start small with the cover design and talk about how anybody who's watching the video, you might see the cover. So these are all Eric's books on the top here,
Love it.
and I've got them kind of mirrored out because I've got kind of multiple copies of stuff.
Oh my god, you
But
do. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's everything the darkness eats, the arc and then the paperback. But then yeah, like so yeah, I'm gonna stop pointing, it looks stupid. Um cover art is really kind of an arresting image. And when I first saw that, I was like, oh man, congratulations. In my mind, I was congratulating you because like you've always had, I think, great cover. And I think we talked about this last time we talked too, but this is kind of in a different kind of theme from the types of covers that you've had traditionally. So moving in a different direction, but still just fucking knocking it out of the park has to feel pretty good.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this cover art was a process, but also so rewarding. And when we got the final one of what it became, it just was so satisfying. So the artwork was designed originally by Sarah Sitkin, who designed the cover art for Gretchen Felker Martin's Manhunt and Cuckoo.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
Sarah is amazing, and I'm a big fan of her artwork. And I was obviously looking through different artists that I wanted to collaborate with for this Blackstone release, and I came across Sarah's work because of her involvement with Gretchen, and I thought this would be an amazing opportunity. Great, I loved her aesthetic, her kind of vibe. It felt very body horror, very visceral,
Yeah.
and she had a bunch of different prints that were all like three-dimensional, like this, like the cover is behind you,
Yeah.
um, and it felt really arresting, felt really like provocative too, and just like brutal. And there were a bunch of different options that we kind of whittled down to like maybe two or three. And we landed on this one just because the red just seemed to really like pop, and I thought it would really jump off the shelf when
Yes.
people were browsing wherever they shop for books. Um, so yeah, it was a great process, and but it's funny. I showed this cover to one of my good friends who is in the horror community, is in the HWA, and he said that it felt like a really natural progression for my cover artwork, like my kind
Hmm.
of portfolio of work behind me, because everything that I've done so far has been like very surreal, painter esque, usually a figure on the front cover, a painted figure with some like distortion to their face or their body in some way. So denoting the body horror in my book, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Mm-hmm.
said this felt like this image that I picked for this book, A Dark I Become Loathsome, felt like the painting finally came to life. Like we're
Ooh,
now like
good.
beyond the painting, and we're in the real world now with these characters I've created. And I thought that was such a brilliant way of looking at like my past work, and how like my past work kind of informs my future self and what I want
Yeah.
to create from here on out. So to me, it just felt like the right decision to go with this cover. And I'm really interested to see how my cover artwork develops with the new cover artists that I'm working with. So I have a book, like I mentioned, coming out with Titan later this year, part of the Burnt Sparrow series. And that particular book, we've commissioned an artist that I'm a big fan of to design a cover for it. So hopefully we'll be getting proofs for that very soon. And then I'm also working with Saga Press, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster, and that cover artwork is in process. So for that book, for like a year or two from now. So I'm interested to see. I'm just interested to see like how my like the covers of my books kind of evolve, just the
Mm-hmm.
way like I evolve as an artist.
Yeah. I love that. Um, I love what your friend said about the evolution of the covers, and
Yeah.
I want to tell you that the first thing I thought when I saw the cover art for At Dark I Become Loathsome was, it was one of those things where it's like, I don't know if I want to figure out what this is. like because I'm like, if it's really disturbing. So there was that like, it made me, it challenged me to decide whether I wanted to really look at it or not. And I think that at that such a early stage, and even seeing it to be challenged with, do I want to engage with this, is like probably a good sign, instead of just being like, I see a picture, it's a book cover, whatever. It was like, I'm already interacting with maybe the meaning of the book.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is a lot of how a lot of people view transgressive fiction, I feel like, in general.
Yeah.
It's something that is provocative and arresting, and if you look too closely at it, it might reveal an uncomfortable truth about yourself or about the world that we inhabit. And a lot of people maybe don't want to admit to those things, and would rather kind of sweep those things just like under the rug. Um, so what you just said was kind of a mouthful, and that's exactly what like queer transgressive body horror, like that's what I love to write. That's what I love to interact with. That's what I love to like consume
Yeah.
as someone who loves like film and literature. Um, that just it really speaks a lot to like the art that I'm creating in general, I feel like.
Yeah. 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 And there's a lot of stuff I can tell something is going to be, whether it ends up being for me or not. And I'm talking generally, like with like books or movies or whatever. I can tell something is going to be like a deeper experience if I have to have the conversation with myself. Am I ready to go through this right now?
Mhm.
Um, like, even, recent movies, like, for me, body horror is something that I need to like make sure I'm ready to engage with,
Yeah,
especially with film.
yeah,
Like, if Cronenberg is a name on a film, I'm like, is tonight the right night for that? And
yeah.
so, um, but it also kind of tells me that this is going to be probably a deeper experience than some stuff that's out there that may be just designed to be more of a casual experience. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and like this book, I feel like in general is not what you just said. Like it's not a casual experience. Like I want this book to be like an event for people. Like I
yeah,
want this to be something that people sit down and really reflect and really think about whether or not they want to like open that first page and start reading.
yeah,
And that to me, like that's the shit I love. Like I love stuff that feels forbidden and feels like completely off limits and feels like dangerous to kind of ingest.
Yeah.
Um, I've always really admired that kind of fiction. I mean, everything from like Clive Barker to Dennis Cooper to Kathy Koja to Poppy Z. Bright slash Billy Martin. Like those are the writers that really shaped me. And those books, I feel like those books are not, they're not like casual reads. Like they're books that you really have to check in with yourself before
Yeah.
you start reading them. And even the films that I love, like I'm thinking of films like um, Antichrist by Lars von Trier, or Mother by Darren Aronofsky, or Possession by Andrzej Zawalski. Like those are not casual viewing experiences. Like those
Right.
are films where you feel like unclean after having watched them. So yeah, I think those kinds of works are really important, but they're obviously like not for everybody. And
Right.
I totally get that. But what I just hope is that people, if they're going to approach it, I hope they approach it thoughtfully and
Hmm.
know that it's not for everybody. And if it's not for you, like you can just put it down and
Right.
not finish it. You don't have to finish it.
And now I know I've only read, this is the third book of yours I've read. So I read Everything the Darkness Eats. I read This Skin Was Once Mine, the collection, and now this. And after all of that, and me agreeing with everything you said, I also feel like as a story, it's probably the most approachable of the stuff I've read of yours. Like, um, I think it does what you're saying, but it also felt, um,
Like more marketable.
well, sure, but like I think because here's what it is. We'll go into like the main theme of it, which is grief,
Yeah.
and we all experience grief. We
It's more
all,
accessible. Yeah.
yeah, like so it you're I think it's tapping into a universal experience, and because of that, like even if the things that the protagonist does in the book are not things that we do when we go through grief, we know what pushed him to the point where something, pushed him there, I guess
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. So I feel like because it's something that is a very universal kind of thing, I feel like that opens the door for more people, but it's like what happens in the story, is that is that also going to be for everybody or not? So, but like that initial entry into the story, I feel is accessible because we all at some point, even if we've lost a pet or whatever, we know grief. So I
Yeah.
think that's
No,
I think
I
that's part of it.
I appreciate that. I think you're right in some I think you're right actually. Like it is a much more accessible work than some of the previous work I've released and had published. And I think it is more approachable because it deals with something that's like universal, that someone like
Yeah.
anybody really can understand. We've all lost someone in our lives that meant a great deal to us. If you haven't, you're very fortunate. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it's interesting. This book kind of starts at that place where it is approachable and accessible, and then it kind of goes off the rails into just like batshit territory.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I'll either like gain new people, like new readers, or I'll lose people. You know what I mean? Like they'll
Yeah.
either be along for the ride or they'll be like, no, this is just like not for me. Like I'm not into splatterpunk or whatever. And that's
Right.
totally valid. I totally understand that. Um, that said, I didn't set out to write a really approachable book. I was initially approached by Norman Reedus's team to write a book for his imprint at Blackstone like 4 years ago. So
Hmm.
this was right after Things Have Gotten Worse came out. I had just signed with my manager, and I get an email one day from Norman Reedus's agent, and I'm like, this can't be fucking real. Like
Right.
this isn't real. And he tells me, he's like, yeah, Norman's like a really big fan of your work. He loved Things Have Gotten Worse since we last spoke. Like, he'd love to work with you on this. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay. And I sent it to my manager and I'm like, could you like see what's going on here? Like, if this is legit. And he called me up like the next day or the day after and was like, yeah, it's legit. Like, Norman Reedus is a fan and like wants to publish you as his like inaugural book at his imprint. And I was just like mind blown, completely mind blown. And it's been such an amazing journey. And but this, getting back to like writing this book and like the impetus to create this kind of like dark transgressive fiction, I didn't set out to write something really accessible. I wanted to write something like very niche, actually, because
Yeah.
Norman Reedus, I knew that he was going to option the book, and I knew that he would be involved in some way in like the film production of it. And I kind of almost tailored this story to kind of suit him as an actor, because I
Mm.
feel like,
Hmm.
for those of you who have read At Dark I Become Loathsome or are going to read it, like he's very much like in line with what I would imagine Ashley, the main protagonist, like I would imagine him to be like the perfect actor for this kind of
Yeah.
role. Um, he has that kind of menace, but also that sensitivity that I feel like you need for a character like this. Um, so it was the first time that I had really written something with an actor in mind,
Sure.
and going into this project, like I I didn't want to write something like super accessible and super like universally accepted or whatever. I wanted to write something really dark and transgressive, and I think it is those things,
It is.
but
Yeah.
I think it also, maybe I surprised myself in some ways. Like I created something that is more accessible and is more approachable to readers who might have been a little skittish before reading some of my material. And that in and of itself, I feel like is great because it introduces more readers to extreme horror, to splatterpunk, and shows you that we are not confined to these restraints in the genre, in the subgenre. Like we are allowed to kind of break free from these conventions and do our own thing.
Hmm.
But still honor those who came before us. So honoring writers like Clive Barker, David J. Scow, Poppy Z. Bright / Billy Martin, like we're able to kind of honor those legends, but also do new things with the material. And I think that that's really special. And I love to see other authors do that. And I'm honored that Norman gave me this amazing platform to be able to do it with this book.
Yeah. And I think that in my heart, in my heart, the hope that I have would be, um, it's the type of story where you can read it, get through it, and be like, oh, books can be this way.
Hmm.
Kind of like you were just saying. But then the natural next question is like, what's next? Where do I go from here? So I would love it if this became the type of book where it was a starting point for people, like an inspiration, like a leaping off kind of point
Yeah,
for a
I
whole
love
thing.
that. Like
Yeah.
I'm always so I've been someone who's been inspired so much by other artists and other authors. And more than anything, I feel like a lot of us get into this industry because we have this bond with these other authors that really challenged and provoked us at a young age.
Right.
And we felt so much when we read their fiction. And we think to ourselves, I want to do that for someone else. I
Yeah.
want to be that starting point for someone else. And I get messages sometimes from very young readers, not too young, obviously, but, high school or college, and they say, I wasn't really into extreme horror, and then I read Things Have Gotten Worse, and it kind of opened up a door for me. And I love that that is an entry point for people because it shows that people are invested in the genre, that the genre won't die, and then it feeds the other authors in that subgenre. Like it gives back a little bit, like because maybe they'll go on to read after reading, Everything the Darkness Eats or Things Have Gotten Worse, like maybe they'll go on to read like Womb by Duncan Ralston or The Slob by Aaron Beauregard, and they'll go like into more like extreme stuff, or maybe they'll go into like reading like Clive Barker, or they'll go into reading Michael McDowell, like one of my other favorite authors from like the 1980s, 1990s. And I mean, you just never know like what's going to be that seminal work for somebody, but
Yep.
it's definitely my hope. I never think too much about my readers when I'm creating and when I'm writing my books, but the one thing I do think about is I want to inspire people the way I was inspired when I
Yeah.
was younger, and I want to be that moment for a reader that's like, this is amazing, like I want to read other stuff like this.
Yeah. 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 And I realized as we were talking about this, I'm like, I'm getting him all gassed up about how his book can influence everybody. So I really hope that that ends up being the case now. Are you going to come back to me and be like, Rob, you fucking liar?
Everybody hated it.
But I did not, and I thought it was a fantastic story. And we haven't really even talked about much of the story, but one of the and it's even in, so there's a book trailer which I don't know if you've had book trailers before, but it's pretty simple, and it's out there if you want to watch it. But the book trailer kind of focuses on one element of the story, which I thought was fascinating, and I'd like to know more about how you came about this. But the idea that Ashley, the protagonist, does this, which I'm going to pause and say, I don't know if you saw or heard about my 2025 horror preview, but Becky Spratford raved about your book. So I just want to make sure you know that's out there.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
did see it. I did see it. I love Becky. Becky is just a
yeah,
legend. I love her.
yeah. And if Becky says so, anybody listening, if Becky Spratford says anything good about anything, just take her word for it.
Yeah,
She
she
knows
doesn't blow
more.
smoke.
She
Yeah,
knows better than anybody. So
yeah, for sure.
Um, but so the book trailer has a kind of a heavy focus on this burying alive kind of aspect of your story, and so the protagonist, at the very beginning, we're kind of introduced to the idea that the protagonist goes through this ritual where he will find people online, and I don't think this is spoiling anything, right? To kind of
No, no,
explain,
no, no.
yeah,
Yeah,
finds people online in kind of like dark webby forum kind of things who are at a place in their life where they feel like they don't want to live anymore, and arranges to go through this ritual with them where he buries them alive and then unburies them, and so they go through this experience of like kind of walking up to the edge of dying, and then walking back and feeling how that experience changed them. So was that one of the kind of foundational elements early in the story, or did you come to that later on, or how did that, yeah, evolve?
yeah. That was definitely like one of the first elements that came to me when crafting like the proposal of what I wanted to submit to Blackstone. Um, I had come across this article. I think it was through Vice. It was either through Vice or ID, and it was all about this organization in Asia that that performs these like fake death rituals for folks who feel like completely disillusioned with life, who feel like at the end of their rope, who are
Wow.
suicidal, or just people that want to have this like really amazing transformative experience. They kind of bill it as like a rebirth unlike anything else. And I read this whole article about this organization that does this in Asia, and I was just so fascinated with the fact that people would willingly put themselves in such harm to kind of prove to themselves that they still wanted to live. I
Yeah.
thought that that was a really interesting, just dynamic at play. And it's funny, I feel like some readers might catch this, but in Things Have Gotten Worse, there's a moment when either Zoe tells this to Agnes or Agnes tells this to Zoe, but they say that they're watching a travel program in Thailand about a fake
Oh
death
wow.
ritual that where they like bury people alive to like encourage like a sort of rebirth. And I wrote that back in 2020, 2021, and it's in Things Have Gotten Worse, and it was like the entry point for this novel as well, but it's mentioned very like super briefly in Things Have Gotten Worse, like it's a blink and you'll miss it kind of thing. But I actually haven't mentioned that in an interview yet, so I feel like
Wow.
people, I hope people like go back and kind of like take a look at that. But yeah, that was definitely like the main focal point of what I wanted the story to be about. I wanted it to be a meditation on like grief and loss and how grief can kind of rot us from the inside out, and trauma in general, how trauma informs us and kind of reshapes us, and the things that we do to cope with this stuff. But also, most importantly, I feel like this book is a lot about intrusive thoughts, which I've
Yeah.
struggled with quite a bit.
Yeah. Yep.
um and I feel like I'm not going to be super prescriptive and be like there's a specific message to this book. Like I'm not going to say that, but I feel like what the book discusses and what it analyzes a lot throughout like the 200 pages that I'm yapping throughout this book. I feel like it really addresses how intrusive thoughts are completely normal and natural,
Yeah.
but it's when we act on these impulses and put them to action that it's a detriment to ourselves and to others.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really the more I discuss this book with in like interviews and like chat about it with readers and friends, I really feel like the book does discuss a lot about like intrusive thoughts and the dangers of putting those thoughts to action.
Well, yeah, there's an especially like pivotal moment in the book that it's the intrusive thoughts and what we do with them that I won't mention because it's definitely going to spoil stuff, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about. And it was at that moment where I was like, I felt the turn in the story, and I
Mhm.
and um, like how I felt about how I empathized with the protagonist, you know, was challenged, you know, at that moment. So I won't say anything more than that for the sake of not spoiling things. But what you were saying kind of made me think of a couple of things. So the protagonist had kind of a 1-2 punch of grief in that we learn at the beginning of the story that he lost his wife to cancer, and then also had his young son was abducted and never found, and so basically lost his whole life in a very like very tragic and traumatizing way.
Yeah.
So the couple of things that I think about with that are the general idea is that trauma over time, the more distance of time that we get from trauma, it's not that it's easier, it's just farther away kind of. And
Mhm.
so life kind of rebuilds or grows back or whatever you want to say.
Sure.
And so without revealing anything, the story made me think about, is it almost better to let that distance grow instead of having your trauma kind of put back in your face, because this kind of happens at some point. So
Yeah.
um like it's almost like it's like tearing off, it's like opening a wound kind of in a way. Like it's easier, this sounds awful to say, but it's easier to like just keep going away from the trauma than to be reminded of the trauma. So that's one thought I had. But also, like, it's interesting that a person who feels probably not too different than the people he's meeting online and offering this experience to is the one who's guiding them through the experience and not having the experience for himself. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah,
there
he's
was
like
like,
removed from it. Yeah.
yeah, there's like an interesting psychology of like, why did he choose to do that? And if he understands what it means, why isn't he doing that for himself? So like it brings up interesting questions about like why we, how we react to our trauma and why we make the choices we make kind of in a way. So I know there's a couple things I said at the same time, but like what you were saying kind of led me to thinking about those parts.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely about those things what you just described too, and you kind of like rewired my brain chemistry with just like what you said about how he's like putting himself in these he's putting his fingers in the wounds constantly,
Yeah.
and he's just reliving his trauma day after day after day, and he thinks he's doing it to help people, but it's really harming him quite a bit in the end.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself, like that's not a healthy coping skill. Like he thinks it's helpful to him. I mean, he's filled with so many poor coping skills just in general. Like he's kind of like he's and you know, nothing, no judgment against body modification or people who like, you know, change their appearance or, you know, do implants or piercings, whatever. But he's restructured his whole body to suit the monster that he thinks is inside, with all of these like horn implants and
Yeah.
these like piercings in his nose and his lips and his ears. And he has kind of given up on his art. He was once a painter and loved to do painting in his spare time, and now has just completely let his creative self like go to the wayside, and his new canvas is himself, but in a lot of ways he's mutilating this canvas, and
Yeah.
he's putting himself in these situations that are not helpful, that are not going to be good for him mentally. And yeah, no, it's everything what you just described, and so much more. And I think this book really speaks to just those who are grieving and those who feel othered just in general,
Yeah.
people who feel like they're outcasts, or they haven't been, you know, let into certain social circles, or they've been completely neglected by parents, loved ones, lovers, whatever. I feel like this book kind of speaks to just the downtrodden and the people who are like just completely disenfranchised. And I really like I felt that for a long period of time, especially like growing up in a small town in Connecticut when I knew I was queer, and everyone around me like knew I was different and they treated me differently, and I tried so desperately to fit in, and like kind of in a few ways, like I kind of like mutilated myself, like figuratively, not literally, but like figuratively mutilated myself to kind of fit into these like societal expectations, these cultural expectations in where I grew up, and it was such a detriment to my character and my whole being.
Yeah.
So I definitely identify a lot with Ashley, and I'm not surprised I wrote a character like him in general. And um, yeah, I'm really like thinking a lot about what you just said, and um, that's why I love doing these interviews, because I feel like I learn so much about the book that I really that like was always there, but I never
Yeah.
put like a voice to it. You know what I mean?
Totally. One thing that you had said before that I think is another thing that this story said to me was about the idea of like your intrusive thoughts, but just the idea that like we react fucked up to fucked up stuff,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean we're fucked up.
Yeah.
Like if you get in a car accident and are paralyzed and you don't have really dark fucked up thoughts because of that, I'd probably be more concerned in that situation than if you did have those dark thoughts. It's like, what do you do with those dark thoughts? So,
And that's
um,
kind of like the heart of Splatterpunk, I feel like, where Splatterpunk often starts with everything is fucked up and the whole world is in shambles. Everything's awful and rotted and gross. And it's how these characters react to this depravity and brutality. And that's exactly what I've kind of mirrored in this book. Um, it starts with these like live burial, these rituals, and shows that we can only do the best of what circumstances we have, and if our circumstances are fucked up, like we're going to react accordingly.
yeah,
You know, it's not like we're going to rise above usually and try to be better. Or I mean, we obviously can. Human beings are super resilient and we have the ability to, but a vast majority of us are going to kind of fade into this depravity and kind of settle into it. And I love what you said, like just because we do fucked up shit doesn't mean that we're actually fucked up. And
right.
that's like the heart of this book. And you know, I did look a little bit like at early responses to the book, and a few people have been like, "Oh, well the author thinks that like having body modification like makes them a monster." And I'm like, "No, like this is not what I'm thinking. Like this is not what I'm thinking. Like I'm just trying to like illustrate how he thinks he's a monster
Yes,
and he's reacting accordingly, but he's not a monster. Like you get through the 200 pages of this book and I don't want people well, I shouldn't say that I don't want people to feel a certain way because people are going to feel however they're going to feel with this book and I get that.
yeah,
But my whole viewpoint of Ashley is he spends this entire monologue, like this monologue of a book, talking about how he's a monster and how
yeah,
he's the other and how he's grotesque and just malformed emotionally, whatever. He's none of those things. The way I view him, like he is not grotesque, he's not
right.
disgusting, he's not vile, he's not loathsome, but he views himself that way, and if that's the way he views him, like self-perception is everything, unfortunately. Like,
Hmm.
you know, we are what we perceive ourselves to be at the end of the day. If that's what we believe, that's what we believe. And you know, we can have people tell us we're not loathsome, we're not vile, but we need to believe it ourselves.
Yeah,
And that's really what the book, that's what the heart of the book is really about.
yeah, and the it's not a surprise that body modification people, you know, I just I might go on a tangent, but here's the thing with the whole body modification thing in this story. I'm just going to put it very plainly. This is not a person who at some point in his life realized, oh, I'm really into piercings and body modification. This is my thing. This is my culture. It's a person who saw that as a way of making them outside what they look like inside.
Yeah.
So like it's not, you're not representing the people who are
I'm not representing that community at
right
all.
at
At
all.
all. Like I don't claim to represent that community whatsoever in this book, and
Yep.
I want to stress that as much as possible.
Yeah,
Like
it's
I don't claim to represent like body modification community like at all with this book. Like this is a character, a singular character going through a massive amount of trauma and grief that responds to that trauma with this coping skill. And that's basically it.
as my very wise author friend David James Keaton once said, the character can be wrong. It doesn't mean the author's wrong. So
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. And you know, I mean, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't be looking at these things anyway because it just raises my blood pressure. But um, you know, people are going to look at this book however they are going to look at it. Thankfully, the response so far has been really great, and I've been really satisfied and really humbled and very appreciative of everybody who's read the book. You know, even the people that it didn't work for, I feel like there's value. I always say
yeah,
there's value in like every single written review that comes in because those negative reviews, they will lure other readers in who maybe are
yeah,
entranced with oh, this the way that they described this thing about the book, like, shock value or whatever. I want to read shock value. Like, they'll be interested in reading about
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
every review is valid, and I'm just totally appreciative no matter what.
Yeah. Um, I encourage people to, if you're gonna shit on a story, read it. Like the tangent that I threatened to go on earlier was Chuck Wendig like over the weekend got in a ton of shit
Yeah,
because he was
yeah,
accused of stealing from a creepypasta about staircases in the woods.
yeah,
Once you read that book, you realize how small of a part of the story a staircase in the woods actually is. And so like if you read that, you see that it's a thing and you bristle and you think, oh, he stole this whole thing, you definitely haven't read the story. Um,
yeah,
but like you said, people are going to react how they react. So
yeah. Can't control it. It is what
yeah,
it is.
here's something that I noticed, but in my mind, I'm always kind of struggling to make connections with stuff. A return to Henley's Edge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there any connective tissue between uh, everything the dark? My brain just totally failed for a second. Everything the darkness eats and at Dark I Become Loathsome. Besides the Henley's Edge being in it, like, is there any crossover that I missed?
There's no major crossover, so you're in the clear. There's the only thing I would say that like tethers both books is that like pervasive feeling of like dread and uncertainty and like bewilderment.
Mhm.
I am a big fan of the films of Jean Rollin, who did a lot of films in like the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, like a lot of like vampire films, like Rape of the Vampire. Um, what else did he do? Night of the Hunter, uh, Grapes of Wrath, I believe.
Right.
Not the original, but just a different one. Or maybe Grapes of Death. Maybe that's what it was called. Um, but his films have this like very surreal, dreamlike quality to them, and very just kind of like off-putting in a lot of ways, but also like you can't stop watching them. And I feel like my fiction kind of falls into that territory a lot. Like I feel
Hmm.
like it kind of follows that like almost like nightmare logic where it's like a fever
Mm,
dream where
sure.
things kind of start where things are awful to begin with, and then things kind of like go off even more, and like things get cranked up to like 11, 12, 13, and it's just the fever pitch of what the hell is going on, like what is happening here. So I definitely am super inspired by films like that. And yeah, no, I don't think there's no like major connective tissue between both books other than they kind of like have the same sort of atmosphere, I would say.
Yeah. I was tempted to. I have behind the stuff that's on the top of my bookshelf. I have I call it my swag box, and it's like anything that I got with a book just goes in this box. So
Yeah.
there's just like this treasure chest of little like stickers and all the signed book plates and all this stuff. And I was this close to. I wasn't reading it at home, otherwise I would have gone into there and pulled out the map um,
Oh yeah.
that came with everything the darkness eats
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
just
yeah.
to
That
like
was
kind of
fun.
like
Yeah.
visualize it. But I didn't have the opportunity to. But yeah, I love it when even if it's just a thing that's common, but there's nothing deeper. I love when I can read something and recognize it. This is a new story to me, but I recognize this thing. There's something about that it feels comforting. Even if the stories are horrifying.
Yeah, it's like what Stephen King does with Derry. Is it Maine? Yeah, it's Maine,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Um I wasn't sure if it was New Hampshire or Derry, Maine, but he does that a lot, and like Castle Rock.
Yeah. Yep.
He does that with like even a lot of his characters. Kind of, it's like this repertory company of like returning players, and
Yeah.
I love that. Like they're there's the book At Dark I Become Loathsome, there are like two sort of vignettes, stories like nested within the main structure of the novel that are
Hmm.
like told to certain characters or they interact with like on the web. And one of those sets of stories, I don't want to get into it too much because it's like spoiler territory, but
Right.
I've definitely entertained the thought of like you like taking those characters out and like referencing them in something else, or maybe
Yeah.
even inserting them as like small parts in like another story or another novella or even like a novel. So I'm interested to see. I don't have anything off the top of my head that like I'm working on right now that like I couldn't like kind of amalgamate those characters into this other project, but it's something that I've definitely thought about for future
Yeah.
use.
Paul Tremblay did that with he had a couple of characters from his book Disappearance at Devil's Rock that show up. God, it's got to be like one, two. It's like three books later in Survivor Song, and he gave them kind of like more of a ending than they got in Disappearance in Devil's Rock because they weren't like big characters. They were like mid or tertiary characters or whatever. So they didn't get like a this is what happened at the end to them, but
Yeah,
like brought them they just kind of resurfaced in Survivor Song in such like a natural way.
yeah,
But like for the people who read all his stuff and they saw that, it was this like it really tickled me that I was like, fuck, I forgot that these characters even existed.
right.
And to see them come back and to see Paul like kind of honor them, I thought was that's like one of my favorite fandom things is like I've been around long enough to know how cool that little tiny thing was.
Yeah, I love that. I want to do that same thing with my fiction. Like I have Burnt Sparrow coming out later this year, and I definitely see myself uh, utilizing Burnt Sparrow and other like the town because it's set in this
Hmm.
fictional town called Burnt Sparrow, New Hampshire, and I definitely see myself setting other stories in that town and maybe incorporating like tertiary characters from the first novel into like other novels that maybe aren't in the series. Like I just
Yeah.
think it's really cool when authors do that. It's really
Yeah.
special.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially if it's just like a wink, like you're not making a big deal out of like you're not like putting up the big signs that are like check out this thing. It's just like
Yeah, it's like
for the
for the
people who
hardcore
know.
readers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. um like here's in my mind I'm like I don't want to talk about the story anymore because we had such great conversation about it that like
Yeah.
like but you mentioned it so I do want to acknowledge that as I kind of adjust myself in my chair. I do want to talk about what's coming up because I don't know. I don't think 2025 is heavy for you, but like you got a lot of stuff, a lot of books. You got the trilogy.
Yeah.
So like, what's the what are the confirmed things that are already known of?
Yeah. So the first book of Burnt Sparrow comes out in September of 2025. So that's kind of like we're already gearing up for that. I'm really excited for that. Um, I have a novel that was commissioned by Saga Press slash Simon and Schuster, which we're we're kind of flexible with the pub date right now. We're seeing where we can kind of insert it. Originally, we were thinking later, but there are some things that are at play right now that maybe it'll come up sooner if we get
Hmm.
kind of all our ducks in a row. So I can't say exactly when that will come out, but I'm hoping sooner rather than later is really all I can say. And then after that, I've got the rest of the trilogy to have published. Um, those books are already all written. I spent like the
Hmm.
last 3 years working on those books, and I'm really proud of them. And then the last thing I have is I have a full length novel that is with Titan called Each Living Thing is Here to Suffer. And that book is probably one of my favorite things I've written. It's much less horror and more like dark literary fiction,
Mm.
which I'm interested to see like how that goes over with readers. It's all about self mummification, the process of like mummifying yourself. I've really been interested in that practice for quite some time, and the whole book revolves around a provocative performance artist who receives a terminal cancer diagnosis, and she decides her last performance, her last like transgressive act is going to be her self mummification process that she documents and then presents her self mummified body to like a theater of spectators.
Wow.
Um, that's essentially the premise of that book, and I'm really excited to share that one with folks. And just because it feels like what eventually I want my fiction to kind of morph into. Like, I love the transgressive body horror. I love transgressive fiction in general, like Dennis Cooper and Clive Barker and all the people I've mentioned. But I also really love just like dark literary fiction, like The
Hmm.
Vegetarian by Han Kang. Um, like, I just love books like that, and I really kind of hope I'm able to kind of shift and
Hmm.
morph into maybe that further down the line. Um, Also, as I get older, like, I don't know how many more you like, once you shock people so much with certain things, like, it kind of loses its charm and loses its appeal. I still am having a lot of fun shocking people and making people upset, but I wonder, like, as I get older, you know, I might wanna do things that are a little bit softer and more, I don't even wanna say, like, sophisticated or elegant, but just, things that are more in line with, like, what I'm interested in at that time, and
Can we?
that's yeah.
Can I ask you to create a genre called cozy splatterpunk?
I would love that. I would love that, cozy splatterpunk. I feel like that needs to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Because somehow it would work. I think.
I feel like it
I
really would.
well, that makes sense. Yeah, like I think that you have to at some point confront the fact that what you want to do or what you're I don't want to use the word capable, but what you're ready to do, what you're primed to do, what life has put you in the place to do is going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
Um, so being open to that, being aware of it ahead of time is kind of cool too. Like, but one thing I wanted to mention that I heard you talk about, I think I heard you talk about elsewhere. If you told me and I forgot, that's embarrassing. But with your trilogy, you specifically waited until all three books were complete before any of them being published, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
And
Yeah.
so, what that tells me is that you care very much about the art being complete instead of like putting out book one and two, and then suddenly you know, there's no third book or whatever. So,
Well, it would have
is that
stressed me out a lot. Like, it would have really stressed me out. I'm definitely a perfectionist, and I like to be in control. I like to kind of have everything ready to go and everything in line, and it would have been really unsettling for me to put out this first novel this year and not having completed the trilogy
yeah?
uh, prior to this book releasing. That would have been really I don't want to say upsetting, but it just wouldn't have worked for me. Just
Do you think it
um,
would have fucked with the process? Like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
because I would have probably seen I probably would have seen comments or reviews about that first book that might have made me rethink like the trajectory of the
yeah,
series. And
yeah,
this series is so important to me. I mean, like, everything I write is super important to me and from my heart. Um, I want my work to be raw and unfiltered, and I don't want it to be influenced by anybody or any one thing. So going into this trilogy, having completed them all, I feel like I'm in a good place where I'm not going to say I can relax because I'm never relaxed. Like I'm always working on the next thing. Like I just finished a new novella over the holiday break that I'm excited to like pitch and get out there into the world, hopefully like in 2028 or 2029.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I love having this work already completed so that I'm not able to like change it too
Yeah.
much. Like I want it to be what it is, and that's just the way I want it to be.
Yeah. I like that. Um, and then I guess my final thought about not like I'm trying to give you more work, but where are you at with short stories?
I don't to be perfectly honest, I don't work on them that much anymore.
Huh.
Because so much of the market is driven by novels.
Yeah.
Short stories are so hard to sell
Yeah.
unless I get an invite to like an anthology or an editor, really likes me and is like, well, I would love to put you in this book. Like I don't really I don't really work that much on short stories anymore, and it's kind of sad because I spent so many years like perfect like working on my craft through short stories and short
Right.
fiction. It's like my first love. Like it'll always be my first love. Um, and it's really sad that so much of the business and the industry is centered around novels. Short
Yep.
story collections just do not sell.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
even if you're like a viral name on TikTok, even if your book goes viral, even if you have all that marketing muscle behind you, like short fiction, it is so bleak, like the landscape, unfortunately. And I wish there was something we could do to like revitalize it and make it profitable and make it rewarding for everybody. Um, it's sort of something that a lot of like newer writers kind of get trapped into because it's a great way to kind of like expose
Right.
yourself to the
Yeah.
industry and get your name out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Showcase your talent.
yeah,
Yeah.
showcase your talent and be
Yep.
in anthologies with like big names like George R. R. Martin and
Yep.
N.K. Jemisin or whatever. Um, but the more I'm like a working writer where I write every day, I find myself really unable to work on short fiction because I'm tasked with completing these novels, you
Yeah.
know?
Yep.
So what I've ended
Yeah.
up doing so actually what I've ended up doing is I kind of satisfy my love for short fiction by nesting some of these shorter like vignettes or little tangents in these larger narratives, these larger
Yep.
novels. And Burnt Sparrow actually has a few little tangents that we go on that I wrote specifically for Burnt Sparrow that kind of all speak to one another and complement one another. So I'm kind of like getting out my getting out my love for writing short fiction through nesting these narratives in larger novels. But
Yeah.
it's unfortunate. Like I really would love to work more on short fiction.
Well, it came up when me and Becky were talking about at Dark I Become Loathsome that, yeah, there are, I want to say three or four instances in that book where it's like someone telling someone else a story
Yeah.
or someone telling a story. And it's like, oh, he snuck a few little shorties in there, and it
Yeah.
was
Yeah. I
it
got
was kind of
to. I
cool.
got to. I had like
Yeah.
no other outlet.
And I totally agree with you. And even the people who are like, so like Brian Evanson comes to mind as someone who
Oh, I love Brian.
just kills it all the time and has sustained releasing short story collections over a long period of time. But that's that's he's kind of an anomaly in being someone who releases almost exclusively short story collections, at least recently.
Yeah.
And then B, he's teaching at a college and stuff. Like he's running a day job and then doing this. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, uh, there are the few people who just live in that short story collection world, but it's very niche. And he's niche within a niche. So like, yeah, like it's unfortunate, but yeah, like then I got to imagine in the circle of authors and stuff, like you guys got to have to eat that up. Like when you find a good short story collection, that's got to be just so satisfying to read them.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I love reading short story collections. I love publishing them too. I love writing short stories.
Yeah.
Brian Evanson comes to mind for like exceptional short fiction. So yeah, like Brian Evanson, Joe Koch, and then I have to shout out one of my favorite short fiction authors of all time, Mariana Enriquez, who
Yeah.
writes like the most superb, unsettling, just brutal short stories I've ever read. I mean, she is such a star, and I absolutely love her work so 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 much.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I love I can't get enough of short fiction, especially anything Mariana writes and touches. It's just so remarkable.
I just listened to. There's been a Laird Barron read along thing going on Reddit, and Greg Green hosts like discussions about it, and they talked about Not a Speck of Light and raved about how good that short story collection was. So I've got it on my shelf and have not read it, but that's supposed to be just masterful too.
Yeah, Laird Barron's amazing. I haven't read that collection unfortunately, but I've read some of his other collections and he is just like a master, like a total
Yeah.
titan of talent.
Yeah, just yeah. Someone I need to spend more time catching up on because I've only read The Croning, and that was like 12 years ago or something like that. So I'm
Right.
definitely
Yeah.
fine. I've got actually I mentioned this in like my conversation with Clay McLeod Chapman, but because Paul and Laird and John Langan are like a little bestie group,
Yeah.
Paul's here, Laird is right next to him on the shelf, and then John Langan's right next to them.
Oh
So
my god, they're all together.
I grouped them together on my shelf. So
That's
to
awesome.
honor their love, their friendship.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So we just kind of casually raved about some stuff that we've read or some authors that we admire and stuff for 2025. And this doesn't have to be the stuff you're most excited about, but just the stuff that comes to mind. Like what in 2025 are you thinking about, or that's on your mind as far as like books that are coming out of
Ooh.
other people, not you.
Yeah,
Of
yeah,
course
yeah.
you, but like
Great question. I'm super excited. I've actually read quite a few books that are already coming out this year in 2025. And I mean, if what I've read is an indication of what's to come and what else is to be published, I mean, it's going to be a banner year
yeah,
for horror fiction. I was able to read The Nightbirds by Christopher Golden, which is a remarkable supernatural literary horror thriller. Um, and I'm afraid to like spoil certain parts of it, but it does include like witches, and it's just super dark and just really unsettling. And it was just a thrill to read, and I highly recommend that book. I also had the opportunity to read A Game in Yellow by Haley Piper,
yeah,
which is published by Saga. It's coming out, I think, in August this year. Um, that book is like a fever dream and is really cool because it incorporates like the text of this like strange cursed play within the actual narrative. So it's very like Lynchian and just unsettling, weird vibes, but also like very erotic and really just it's just such a cool concept. I thought like a really innovative and interesting, unique premise. So I'm
and that
excited.
cover is amazing.
Yeah, the cover
Yeah,
art's incredible. I mean, Saga never misses with cover art.
yeah,
So that I'm looking forward to people like getting their hands on that. Other than that, I know like obviously Chuck Wendig has a book coming out. I haven't read that one yet, unfortunately. I'm excited for Daniel Kraus's book, Angel Down. I'm excited for Paul Tremblay's book, which is, I believe, like middle grade
Yeah.
horror.
Yep.
So that's going to be interesting to see him like in a different sort of genre, I guess maybe. Um, See how he operates in that sphere. Um, I know who else has stuff coming out. Oh, Nathan Ballingrud has the
Yes.
second book of his Lunar Gothic trilogy. That I'm
So
really
good.
looking forward to. I really enjoyed the first book, The Crypt of the Moon Spider.
Yeah.
I thought that was really beautiful and poetic and really well written. Um, I think Sam Rebeline has a new collection coming out through Titan. I'm excited about that. I don't know if CJ Lead has any books coming out this year. I know she just had American Rapture come out.
Not that I'm aware of, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I don't know everything. So
Yeah, same, same. I'd love to read more from her.
yeah,
Um, I know Clay has some books. Oh, Clay has a lot coming out. Clay McLeod Chapman has a
yeah.
lot coming out. I'm always excited to see, what he's cooking up. I know he has. I think he has a short story collection with Titan coming out. Oh, and I read. How could I forget? I read Play Nice by Rachel Harrison,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
coming out from Berkeley in September this year. And it's honestly one of her darkest books, I feel like. It's
Nice.
really just really brutal and really just interesting, really fucked up, and just a really good time. So I'm excited for all of that. I feel like
Yeah.
this year is going to be a great year for horror.
Yeah. Just banger after banger, if you ask me. Like,
Yeah.
but and I feel like I say that every year
Yeah, I do
since like
too.
like I think the first year I said that was like 2018,
Yeah.
and every year since it's been like I was talking to Josh Malerman. I want to say it was 2020, and I think one of us in the conversation said, "I don't know how anything's going to beat horror in 2020." And it's like, oh, we didn't know
Yeah.
what was coming.
Right.
Because it's become so much more diverse. And
Hmm.
first of all, there's more from marginalized voices.
Yeah.
The types of stories that are being told just keep getting more and more different and unique. So yeah, like, and I think that, thanks to how the election turned out, it's not going to slow down anytime soon. Like,
Yeah, I
there's gonna be plenty
know.
of suffering to write about.
Totally. Absolutely.
So, not to end it on that bleak note, but yes, there's so much good horror. And hopefully, what it does is the thing that you were talking about earlier, which is like gives more people an entry into experiencing new stuff, finding new authors they love, and and discovering their contemporaries and starting to read their stuff, and just like on and on. That would be wonderful. I would love that.
Totally. I mean, that's what it's all about is finding those entry points and inspiring that next generation. That's what happened to me, and that's what I love to do with my own work. I really want to be that thing that inspires someone else to say, I really want to tell stories for a living. Like I want to
Yeah,
write, I want to create something shocking and obscene and create like cause a reaction from readers. Like that's just like the best.
yeah. There's one of my favorite things when I talk with someone about a book that we have both read is to be able to say like that one scene, but like just say, oh, that scene, and they
Yeah.
understand exactly what I'm talking about. Like
Mhm.
I love that so much, and I feel like definitely with everything the darkness eats, there was one of those.
Yeah.
And in conversations I've had so far with, I'm gonna wrap it all up by saying I have a day job, and I was leaving to, you know, come home and talk to you. And I said, oh, I got to get home and get ready. I'm interviewing an author tonight. And they're like, oh, who? And not necessarily horror people, but I said, oh, it's, Eric Larocca. And he's like, that name sounds familiar. What has he written? And I was like, well, I'd be surprised if this guy, because he seems very straight laced and almost a little military.
Yeah.
Um, I'd be surprised. And I was like, oh, his books have really long names sometimes, like things have gotten worse since we. And he's like, I read that. I loved that book, and it was so random that like this person I happened to work with, and so he was so excited that he'd read the book and liked it, and he's like, make sure you tell him I loved that book.
That's incredible. Wow. That's
So
fucking awesome. Thank you so
so
much for telling me that.
yeah, that was I was jazzed by that, and I was like, oh, I hope Eric likes that because like it's always so cool to just find someone in the wild who knows about a thing. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
like very surprising. I'm
yeah,
like shocked a little bit. That's really cool.
yeah. So we'll end it on that. I want to end it with the positive vibes. So
Yeah, I love it. I
um,
love it.
this is our second time we've talked, and it was just as great as the first time. And I just want to thank you so much, first of all, for the time, but also for challenging me to look at covers and read stories that um, I'm nervous about, but end up loving. And that can't be easy. So thank you for your time and for your amazing stories.
Oh man, thank you so much. It's been an honor to chat with you, and I can't wait to talk with you about the next book. It's going to be great.